Personally, that helps me a lot. If you give me too many choices, it's really problematic. So, you say, here's the words, here's the script, here's the language, and you got 3 colors. What? I don't have 3 colors? You only have 2? Oh, no. Okay. So, I have to get creative, right? And within those parameters, I am now trying to convey language and give it a visual voice. And so this piece here, just feel it first. Just enjoy it before we go into any of all the details, because it's really easy to then get swamped with them, right? But as a calligrapher, I'm always balancing those 2 things. This visual realm over here, and form, and pattern, and flow, and then all these technical things that I have to get correct. It's got to be the words, and they have to fit the conventions of that calligraphic tradition, at least to some degree. Or if I'm going to break them, I better be ready to defend it against someone who says, you can't do that, right? And so I have these 2 things that I'm always balancing out, right? This is a small piece, but if it's larger, I have to make sure that I go back and proofread it on a completely different day than the day I was getting lost in the form. Because when I get lost in the form, I put words in the wrong places and write the wrong things, and I am just looking at form, and I am not paying any attention to the meanings that are going on. So that's just sort of an insight into how I think about the work that I do, and an invitation for you to think about those 2 things as we look at these specific pieces. This is in Sanskrit. It's in Devanagari script. So that's a South Asian alphabet. And Sanskrit is a very ancient language. It's sort of like writing things in, classical Greek, okay? And it's been written with many different writing systems, but this is the most common writing system it's written in today. And this piece immediately brings up all the problems of doing calligraphy in words, okay? Most of the work that I do is on commission, and so I'm always in, it's like a collaboration or a dialogue with another person, with whoever asked me to do this work. So that's the other part of my work that's really interesting, is that, somebody else has an idea, and somebody else wants me to manifest it, and so it's a cooperative venture. So this says faith, hope, and love in Sanskrit. And immediately, what's the very first problem we have is what words to use, right? What words to use. So I'm sure all of you are familiar with the idea that when we look, for example, at the Bible, we talk about that there's many different words for love in Greek, right? More words than we have in English. And so we realize that this word in English that says love conflates these different meanings. And yet, we're reminded, right? Well, there's agape and there's eros and there's these different manifestations of love. In this case, you heard that coming, right? In this case, the question was, what word in Sanskrit are we going to use for faith? Because there's many different words for faith. And so immediately we have to make a choice, but the choice also helps inform us of why would there be a choice? What's the difference between those words, right? So another level at which we're looking at this calligraphy when Mary first called me and said, would you like to put some art up in the church? And by the way, we need it in only like however many days. Barbara, thank you so much, Barbara. Okay, I should give credit where credit's due. So when Barbara said, hey, June could put some work up, they told me that the theme was prophets. And I thought, well, we could take that sort of literally, and I'm looking through my work, and I'm like, well, this was, this prophet and that prophet, right? But where my mind went more was to prophecy. And, how is it that we understand prophecy, right? And so if we look in the Jewish tradition of prophets, and even beyond to other religions that have a tradition of prophets, the prophets are usually speaking out, and I say that loudly because the prophets are usually pretty vocal about it, to remind us what is our human relationship supposed to be to the divine and to society, right? And that message is usually a combination of hope and warning, right? You forgot to, take care of the land. It was supposed to have a Sabbath year. And you're just growing crops every single year, and woe unto what's going to happen, right? You are mistreating the poor. You are, everything is about money, right? Yes? Sounds familiar, right? Yeah. And so what I think to myself is, in what ways does art function as in that voice as well, right? What can we take from art, and how does that work? And that's just an open-ended thought. I don't really know the answer to that, but it occurs to me as I do my work and I'm having this dialogue with people, and I hear the reasons why people want me to make certain things, that people bring these concerns forward, and that's on their minds, right? So here we have faith, hope, and love. And what word is used for, so this is bhakti, asha, and prema. Those are the three words in Sanskrit. And bhakti is an interesting choice because is faith, as we understand it, belief, or is faith devotion? Is faith primarily that we have a solid thing that do you believe in this or not? And if you don't have faith? Or is faith something that's in your heart that you experience and you express? It could go both ways. In Sanskrit, those are different words. So we had to choose one. So bhakti is devotion. Bhakti is devotion, which I'm not sure is the choice every single person would make, given that they had to have a choice, right? But that's what's in this one. And I just bring it up because it just explains, like, at a certain point, I had to conflate things. I had to choose one word. I couldn't say to the person, oh, there's 3 or 4 words. Could we use them all? And they're like, that would be a terrible design. Not at all what I want to see. Right. Okay. We can go to the next visual. The next piece is the Lord's Prayer, as found in the Gospels. And just keep it going till the text disappears. Okay. So what's interesting about this version of the Lord's Prayer here is that it's in Aramaic. Aramaic is a language that's related to Hebrew and to Arabic. And the script here actually is very close to what early Arabic script looked like. If you can read Arabic and you sort of look at the Aramaic for a while, you begin to be able to piece it out and say, oh, yeah, I can actually read that, so that's good. So here's another little language confusion. Aramaic was the common language that people in this part of the world were speaking at the time that Jesus was alive. The other language that people were speaking commonly was Koine Greek. That was the language of the Eastern Roman Empire. So we have these two languages that are being used to try to reach the masses of people rather than using a language that might be more sacred, for example, Hebrew, but which nobody actually spoke, or a language that had more clout, Latin, which nobody in this part of the empire spoke unless they were highly educated. Or I suppose we could have gone to the, sacred language a little farther east of the Persian Empire, Pahlavi, Avestan, but nobody spoke that, I assure you. So we have this teaching that's in Aramaic, but the early Christian texts are all written in Greek because the audience they were pitching it to, they figured the most number of people knew Greek of their target audience, if you like, right? So we have this weird thing where the things that supposedly were said in Aramaic, the teachings, right, are now translated into Greek. But the first translation of those texts that's ever made is into Aramaic. But it's a translation, but it's really early. This language today, it's known usually as Syriac, sometimes as Assyrian. It's the liturgical language of the Syrian Orthodox Church, also known as the Syriac Church or the Assyrian Church. And it is still a spoken language. It's not just a liturgical language. There are people that, I personally grew up with who speak this language every day at home, which is a remarkable thing. And one of the reasons that they are really big on keeping their language is because why? They're like, we are the only people left who speak the language that Jesus spoke. So we are not going to forget it. We'll see how long they can hold out on that. It's a smaller and smaller number of people.
And where do they live?
Mostly in Chicago. That's true. That is absolutely true. The Assyrians over the years, the Middle East has had one calamity after another, and minority groups tend to leave. They're always in danger. So the biggest concentration of Assyrians in the world is in Chicago. It's a very random thing. It's just, one person goes somewhere and the next person follows. So.
And you spoke that?
No, I do not speak Syriac myself. I can write it. And I consult with people to make sure that, I got it right. And they're hard on me. And they're like, that letter is not correct. Like, yes, Mary?
Is it a left-right?
It's read this way.
Left to right?
Right to left.
Sorry.
Right to left, yes. It's right to left, just like Hebrew, just like Arabic. It's right to left alphabet, yeah. And these letters are connected. So it's what we would call a semi-cursive alphabet. Some letters have to connect to each other and others do not. And as is typical with most languages in their early form, it was not traditional to leave spaces between words. There's no punctuation. These little marks that you see are vowel markings. They're optional, but they're put in usually if you're writing sacred texts. The same is true if you're writing Arabic, sacred text. If you're writing Hebrew, you put the vowel markings in if it's a sacred text because you want there to be less confusion. But if you were just writing somebody a receipt, we don't need any, So
get taught in Farsi?
I had a bilingual education in Persian or Farsi and English. So yes, those are the two languages I speak the most fluently. And then the list gets, goes on down from there, languages I speak a little bit better and worse and that I've totally forgotten. Languages I used to know and I don't know at all anymore. So it's that's how it works. The way I work as a calligrapher is that it gets easier to learn the calligraphic conventions of another language the more of them I know how to write. But when it comes to the content and the linguistics and all, I make sure that I consult with people who know those things proficiently, right? Okay, let's go to the next one. So the next piece is in a language I do know. It's in Persian, otherwise known as Farsi. This is a recent piece. It's by the poet Rumi, who oddly enough is now world famous. When I was growing up, nobody actually was sure where the country of Iran was, let alone that there was a poet. Now I think a lot of people have heard of Rumi and they actually aren't sure what language Rumi actually wrote in. So that's an odd thing. Are you moving it forward a little bit? Yeah. So Rumi lived in the 13th century. And in a period of what we might call globalization. So all sorts of peoples and countries claim that Rumi belongs to them. He was born in what is now Afghanistan. He died in what is now Turkey. He wrote in Persian. But that was not an unusual situation at the time. He's called Rumi because that part of that Turkey, the Anatolian Peninsula, had recently been part of the Byzantine or Roman Empire, and so the common name for it was still Rome. So when people say his name is Rumi, that's actually just a way of describing which Muhammad Jalal al-Din we're talking about. Oh, the one from Rome. He's also called Jalal al-Din Muhammad Balkhi because he was from Balkh in what is now Afghanistan. So that's just an epithet, right? That's just like saying, so-and-so of Gainesville, right? Right? It's just a thing. And most people in the world who speak Persian or Turkish do not call him Rumi. They might not even recognize who you're talking about. He's usually just called Molana, which just means master. Why? He was a Sufi teacher. And so he was just known to his students as the teacher, right? It's like calling somebody your guru, right? He spoke we understand is that his poetry was mostly transmitted orally and that his students wrote it down. It goes for volumes and volumes and volumes. In fine print, it's about 14 volumes of work, so it's voluminous. And there is no standard text, meaning there's differences between the different versions that we've had handed down. And that is partially due to the fact that in Persian poetry, it is a mixture of an oral and a literary transmission at the same time, meaning the bulk of this poetic tradition has been passed on by people who cannot read, but know it by heart. And yet it's based on an original written text. And it is considered completely acceptable to improvise, just like music. Persian poetry is very closely tied to Persian music. It's often recited to music. Every line of classical Persian poetry has an actual meter that corresponds to a certain drum beat, so that the poetry can be recited specifically to a certain pattern. And you can improvise on both. And it's considered completely acceptable to take a line of this poetry and improvise on it. And that is a very common thing that's still done. If you listen to Persian pop music, a huge amount of it is based on classical Persian poetry to this day. And it's people improvising on it, right? So this is the entire section of one of Rumi's poems. And when I say poems, I need to explain to you that when you see a translation of a Rumi poem, this means that somebody somewhat arbitrarily decided which piece of this long text, which goes on and on and on without any breaks, constitutes a poem. Okay? There is no actual break in the text. It just goes on. Stream of consciousness almost, if you will, right? With lots of repetitions and patterns, and even a wonderful piece, which I have to say is intentional gaps. A line that's not said as a way of bringing attention to the thing by not putting it there. Some reason the translators often write those things in as if they were there, which I think is doing a disservice to you as the audience. So one of the big problems I have is that people constantly come to me and they say, I want this Rumi poem. And I have to, first of all, find out, well, is that line that you're telling me actually a Rumi poem? There are a lot of fake translations out there by people who think if they put the name of somebody famous on it, you'll read what they wrote. This is called fraud. Then there's the people who interpret. That's, of course, how poetry works, right? We can't translate poetry without interpretation. So some of the interpretations are very tangential, and some are more literal, and they wander around, right? So that's very interesting. So someone may be really in love with a way it was worded in English, and when they find out what it said in Persian, they're not so in love with it anymore. And I feel, I guess I'm too honest, because I always feel like I have to explain what it really says, and then people are like, I don't know, right? And sometimes it's this long in English and this long in Persian, and sometimes it's this long in English and that long in Persian, and they don't match up. So all I would say to you is when you're reading Persian poetry in translation, or any poetry in translation, it's interesting to read multiple translations, okay? It's like wandering around the bush. And in the end, you might understand what's in the middle that can't be translated, just because you got all these different viewpoints. The last thing I'll say about Rumi is that, again, talking about words, right? I mentioned that the Gospels get translated into Aramaic right away, right? But the bulk of the Christian tradition for the common people veers off in a different direction, and I would say it was very much based on focusing on the lives of the saints, right? And the connection to the Jewish tradition of how to interpret the scriptures is mostly severed, right? All of this commentary, right? So, for example, when you're reading a text here in services, you don't get to hear what the rabbinical commentary is. That's something that Christians have no access to, right? And by the time that the Christian church comes back around to wanting to focus on text, in the Protestant Reformation, right? It is a completely focused only on that core scripture, right? Not on any other commentary. And new commentaries are created that have no going back to that original thing. the Muslim tradition is very different. The Muslim tradition also looks at the Quran and all of this, but there's a huge body of Muslim tradition that is more related to the stories that somehow get borrowed from the Jewish tradition and voluminous commentaries on them. And so when Rumi is writing his poetry, he's always pulling from these stories. And so part of the challenge of translating and understanding this poetry is to catch what the allusions are, right? So in this poem, he says, this poem is called On the Day That I Die, but like a lot of poems about death, it's actually about how to live, not how to die. But he says, have you ever seen a bucket lowered into a well coming back empty? And you might not catch the allusion. It says, why lament for a soul when it can come back like Joseph from the well? Do you catch the allusion? Which Joseph? Who are we talking about? Joseph, yes, Joseph who gets sold by his brothers into to Egypt, and they cast him into a well first, right? Either to kill him or just to keep him there until somebody comes along and wants to buy him, right? That is a major story in Muslim tradition, a touchstone story. And so here it is, but the allusion is going to be so on the fly, going by, right? Who's leaving? You can leave.
Sorry.
No problem. Do you have to stop the streaming when the service starts?
No.
You don't?
We only stream one.
Oh, okay. All right. Do you want to go to the next one?
Wait, before you do that.
Yes.
I have an observation and then a question maybe, that the language feels very fluid.
Yes.
You're speaking about the culture.
Yes.
Fluid. And that there aren't spaces a lot between, but there's a lot of repetition there, like you were saying. And it also has a form. And I'm wondering if that was what you did with that form, what about that form?
Oh, okay. Yes, thank you so much. So, this is Arabic calligraphy. Persian is written with the Arabic script since the advent of Islam. And this is a particular style of Arabic script which is mostly used for writing Persian and Urdu, and not really used very often for writing Arabic, okay? So I feel like, yes, this is very attuned to the way that Persian poetry and Persian music is felt. It's very improvisational. It's not going for a precise mathematical pattern, which you can do with Arabic script, right? The imperfections, if you will, are part of the deal. We don't want to have gone back and touched them up, because we're flowing through it. This one is in the form of a bird, obviously intentionally. It didn't just happen. That is a tradition in Arabic calligraphy to make things in the forms of shapes, whether they are geometric shapes or animal shapes or flowers or whatever. Because the language is the script is very malleable. A great deal of freedom is given to the artist to do what they want. I happen to have, by complete coincidence, an exhibit of my work, which is up at the Sweetwater Print Co-op on Main Street. I have my cards over there on the other lectern, and the best thing to do is just to text me that you want to come to the gallery, and I'll make sure that the gallery's open, because otherwise we don't always have hours. So just text me. It'll be up for another 3.5 weeks. But that show is really all about how we can make calligraphy in the shapes of things, not just in Arabic script, but in other scripts, right?
Did you choose that shape, or is that some sort of what you saw in the words, or?
I thought that they matched somewhat of the meaning of the poem,
Right,
this
like flying away
liberation,
by
this, yes, right. So, there we go. I'm adding my own level of meaning to the poem, which otherwise doesn't mention birds. But in the Sufi tradition, birds are often symbolic of the spirit or the soul. And that when you're talking about birds, that's what you're talking about. So it does reference a vocabulary that already exists, right? Like,
Of course, there's the song, "When I die, I will fly away."
sure, and yes, but so it's a very old tradition.
All over.
Yes, it's a very old tradition, but specifically also there's that tradition, right? There's a famous poem by Attar called "The Conference of the Birds," and all these birds are having this debate about what they should do and should they go on this risky journey, and they all argue about different philosophical, reasons that they should or shouldn't, and right? But it is all a debate about the life of your soul, right?
There's so much metaphor.
Right, so it's poetic metaphor.
Sounds like the sandhill cranes when they were leaving.
It's just like the sandhill cranes. They're circling around, and they're like, should we leave now? Should we not? Which group are you going with? I think I'm not going with you all. You're too crazy, right? You can just hear them, right?
Too soon, I'm gonna stay.
Yeah. And then sometimes I see that last one just fly off by itself across the sky, and I'm like, whoa, you just decided not to go with those people, right? I love it.
Late.
Okay, Tristan, we can have the next one. I won't go on and on, I promise you. We will finish up here. I can get carried away talking about Persian poetry. So this next piece is also in Sanskrit, and keep going. Okay, stop. And you can see here that I've almost obscured the calligraphy. I've almost obscured the calligraphy in this interwoven tapestry of repeating the same line over and over and over again. And it's, very hard to piece out and pull out the actual words, right? This is not a common way to treat Sanskrit calligraphy. So I would say I borrowed this more from, other traditions, right? This says Hari Om Sat Tat, and we could go on forever about what does that mean. But what I'm trying to put in here is this this is a mantra that sort of embeds us in the tapestry of existence, right? And so visually, I'm conveying that meaning here. And again, this takes us back to what I started with, which is I'm just treating this really on an almost purely visual level at a certain point. I did the calligraphy, and then I'm just like playing with it until I'm like, yes, that feels like fun, interesting, meaningful.
It really looks woven to me.
Yes, all that weaving.
And the colors that you chose for the ones that come forward a little bit, a lot, are also kind of indicative of the softness of the piece to me.
Right, and that's where I agonize. Should they come forward? How much? At all? Do we just completely obscure the calligraphy? Let's see. Okay, we can do the next one.
One of the things I love about this one is the way it's repetitious like a chant. You know, when you're
Yes.
chanting,
Yes.
say it again and again and again, but yet it's shining through. It's just-
Right. And it is a mantra, so it would be chanted over and over and over. Exactly. So I do try to give a visual voice to something about how the words would be used, right? I will recite this one for you. This is from Psalm 145. This is, "The Lord is gracious and merciful, slow to anger and abounding in love." Right?
Written in what language?
To me, that is like almost, to my own personal self, that's just sort of the essence of meaning of Scripture to me. So,
Is that also?
so
in,
this is in Persian.
Persian.
It's translated, of course, from Hebrew.
Can you say it in Persian?
I will. خداوند رحمان و کریم است، دیر غضب و بسیار رحیم. And what's nice about that translation is it is using a lot of borrowed Arabic words here into Persian, and so they have the same roots as the original Hebrew. Right. And so when we say Rahim here at the end, which is the root of it is Rahma, which means the womb. And this is the love of God, like a mother who had a child. Of course, this gets completely lost when we move out of Hebrew or a related language, right? But it's so interesting here that it comes back in this translation here. And of course, it's not an accident. The translators intentionally stuck as close to the Hebrew as they could, right? And also the translators are trying to get that rhythm and that flow into the language. خداوند رحمان و کریم است، دیر غضب و بسیار رحیم, right? It's like, so that you want to say it, like a mantra, right? And so I try to, I've written this thousands and thousands of times, but in this particular example, I'm trying to get that flow into it, the rhythm, the way it's spoken.
When you're doing it, are you hearing it?
I hear it, yeah. خداوند رحمان, right? Yes. So I would say that that's another part of being a calligrapher, which is when you become so familiar with a particular phrase, again, like a musician, you can use it so easily in so many different ways because your hand just knows that line so well that I could vary it for you just right now. I could sit here for an hour and just do it a different way every time, without pausing, right? It's like if you knew a theme or a scale right? The next one is Hebrew. Hebrew has a very Hebrew has a very, very important and strong calligraphic tradition because in Hebrew, the letters are holy in and of themselves, right? If you write basically in Hebrew, you're not even supposed to throw the piece of paper away. It's supposed to go into a repository. But Hebrew stayed as a script that each letter is individual, whereas the related scripts, Aramaic and Arabic, became these semi-cursive scripts. So it's only until we get to modern Hebrew calligraphy that we sort of have this idea that we can play a little bit with the letters and overlap them and morph them a little bit. It's still not cursive. Every letter there is separate, but I've run them over each other, right? And this is very common in modern Hebrew calligraphy, but it's a new tradition, it's a new thing. Until very recently, it was just boom, 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 one letter after another, right? That's it, because each letter is so important. You just don't want to mix them up. They shouldn't touch each other. So if a proper Hebrew scribe who's used to writing scripture sees this, they're like, no, not okay. Not okay.
You're breaking some rules there.
You've broken some rules, right. This is Baruch Hashem. Blessed is the name. Blessed is the name. And the name, of course, we all know the name. That is God. So Baruch Hashem. It's a blessing or a reminder that we have blessings. Either way. Yeah. And then we'll do the last one. The last one.
Are they signed, like onto the left and the bottom?
That's my little mark.
That's your mark.
That's
And
my
that
little mark.
Says what?
That's just my mark.
Your mark.
It's my initials in a very abstracted form.
Okay.
That's where you get my line. I say, we'll let the art historians sort that out. This is called the Humata. It's the ancient Zoroastrian creed. This is the Avestan script, also called Pahlavi. It's the script that the Zoroastrian scriptures ended up getting written in eventually after a bunch of other scripts, and prior to that it was only an oral tradition. We don't have all of the ancient Zoroastrian scriptures because they were mostly entirely orally transmitted and got lost. But this is a very common phrase in Persian. Every Iranian knows this phrase. And it's interesting, we started with faith, hope, and love as that tripod of things that depend on each other. But this is a different tripod. And this tripod is about your thoughts, your words, and your actions. And they go in that order. The idea being that in order to have proper or good or virtuous actions, you must have good words. And to have good words, you must have good thoughts. So this is pendarenik, guftarenik, graftarenik. And so that is called the Humata. And that's the script. And from a calligraphic point of view, what's interesting is that early version of Arabic, which looks very similar to the way Hebrew looks, separate letters, and this script merged to make the Arabic script that is the flowing one. Historically, these two things come together, and we know this actually. I had to do some research for a talk I gave a few years ago at FSU on what's the origin of Arabic script, and I was really surprised to find out that people aren't actually sure. But one thing that was great is that we have the names of specific calligraphers who are in the early administration in Baghdad when the Islamic conquest has just happened, and we have this, conquest has happened, and now there's this huge empire that has to be administered. And who are the only administrators who know how to do this? Oh, darn, they administered the Persian Empire that just got defeated. And the administrators are saying, the calligraphers, the scribes, the people, they're like, if you use this script of yours, which isn't very good, you won't be able to collect all the tax money. So they kept records in the Pahlavi script at the beginning of the Islamic Empire, and then they merged them together. And we know the names of the people who did it, which is fascinating. Because how often do calligraphers get to be famous? I just have to say,
Name, right?
well, they were important people because they solved this bureaucratic problem. And just a reminder, yes, there is prophecy and spirit and all that, but sometimes it comes down to tax collection. Now, with that, I leave you. My cards are over there. If you want to come see my show, it's unusual. I put up a lot of pieces. I don't usually do that. Got carried away. So if you want to come see it, just text me, and I'll meet you at the gallery. It's downtown Gainesville. Okay? Do I have any Hafiz? Not today.